Welcome to the Beyond the Lines podcast. In a world filled with so much hate and division, we want to do something about that. We all have these lines that we draw in our lives where we feel like that is our limit. We can't listen past that line. We can't love past this line. We can't understand someone who is on the other side of the line. But our goal with this podcast is to treat all people with the dignity that they deserve, even if we disagree with them. My name is Jonathan Miller, and I'm one of the hosts today. And I'm joined by my co-host, Clayton Edelman. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
And also today we have on the podcast Cal Jernigan, lead pastor at Central Christian Church. We've had him on for several episodes now, and really excited to have you on one more time.
Oh, thank you. Good to be here.
You made the cut, so you're not going anywhere.
There we go. All right.
Well, hey, just sitting here looking at both of us, I'm kind of under the assumption that we don't come from the same families. I don't recognize you. I didn't grow up with you. So that means that we all have got different stories probably, and we're coming from different places. So Cal, this whole episode, we're just talking about how to listen to somebody who's got a different perspective from us. And you said a while back ago you said other people's stories are different than our own. In their story, most everything is different than your story. Different family of origin, a different education, a different experience, different places that their story would be told. And that's what makes their story and not your story. So what have you found to be most helpful when you're trying to learn and understand someone else's story?
Wherever you've arrived, wherever I've arrived, you got there by a combination of factors that are absolutely unique to you. And somebody else who would travel down the same path would be similar to you. There'd be your kind of your personality differences, but the truth of the matter is you're kind of a summation of a whole bunch of things that happen to you along the way. And so whatever stage in life you are, that's kind of how you got there. I think the thing that is, intriguing is when you start to realize that if you would have lived somebody else's life, if you would have been born where they were born, when they were born, had their parents, had their set of friends, had their life experiences, had their ups and downs and all of that, you probably would not end up being the same person you've ended up being. And yet we just think, no, I'm just me. This is who I am and I'd be this way. But you're a product of a whole lot of factors in your past. So I think what's really important is in trying to understand somebody else's story is that you don't try to project your journey onto their life, because that's what I think we do. This is what I think we get wrong. We hear it through our lens, not through their lens. And I think listening is trying to discern, just going, okay, explain that to me. Like, I don't tell me about that. And then the willingness, as we've talked about before, to ask questions and go, well, what was that like? I know, well, what caused you to do that? Or what were you thinking? Or any of those kind of things. Because again, I'm going to naturally by default assume that you're doing what I would have been doing under those circumstances. It's just not true. And so I think just a curiosity and a willingness to peel back the onion and just go, explain that, man. Like how'd you get there? And then a genuine interest. And this is where I think so much of listening breaks down. We always talk about, they're cliches, you're given two ears and one mouth. You should listen twice as much, that sort of thing. And another one that goes with it, is often in a conversation, it's one person talking and another person just waiting to talk. And you're formulating what you're going to say as soon as that moment comes, when there's a break. And consequently, you're not fully there. You're not fully in the moment. So I think listening means what I'm going to say in a minute doesn't matter. What are you saying in this moment? And I need to try my hardest to get around that. So just a willingness to go, tell me about that.
It's so true, because even just now I'm in my own world, like, okay, what am I going to say next? Right. And I'm not fully listening. Like, I'll just admit that openly right now, because that's what we do.
We do it all the time. It's just second nature. So consequently, all that incredibly profound stuff I just said, you missed.
I'm really good at that. Yeah.
But I on a serious note, when you're talking to somebody and when somebody's willing to open up their life to you, because we're not talking about what's your opinion of, Clayton, if you tell me about your growing up years, John, if you tell me what it was like when, if you're telling me a story of this is when I got picked for something, when I got rejected by someone I cared about, that you're entering the sacred space. And if I'm flippant about that, because all I'm doing is just trying to make a joke or trying to come up with a comeback or something snarky to say, I'm dishonoring you, and I am going to miss the point of what you just said. So it's just a willingness to go, your life matters. And I, one of the greatest grace giving things I can do is actually honor you by listening. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I mean, even just thinking in my upbringing, it's easy to sometimes just be dismissive or look at it through just even my perspective of, hey, that's not what I went through or what I experienced, and my life has gone so well, so you should experience that, at least in your perspective or whatnot. So I definitely get that. I think too, what you just said is really good for people that you don't know, right? People that you're meeting for the first time and actually trying to learn more about them, or maybe it's somebody you have already met before and you're just trying to grow deeper with them. But I think about, I grew up with sisters and we did not always get along. That was just kind of the nature of things. So how would you encourage us, or suggest that we act with those who we struggle to get along with, that we should just be simpatico and be getting along with?
So a couple of episodes back, we talked about contempt and the damage that contempt can do. And that's really, I think a lot of times what that is, I've dismissed you, I've devalued you, you don't matter. You're just family. You're just a sister of mine or whatever. And I think whenever you do that, you're going to go off, you're going to veer off the rails. And so like, how do you stop that? Is you stop, inside your head, you stop feeding contemptuous thoughts that, you have nothing to say. And, you're not going to tell me anything I don't know. So it's going to go nowhere. So I think how you get around that is you have a little mental discipline that just says, I'm not going to do that. And this goes back to so many, relational values that we've just wrestled with. Consider one another more important than yourself. Don't just look out for your own interests. This is basic. This is what we're talking about. Does your sister have a point of view that is her point of view? This is how she sees it. And again, when you get to familial things, stuff gets really weird, which again, all of us understand that. You choose your friends, you don't choose your family, or you can reject your friends, you can't reject your family. Well, you can, but the dynamics are so much deeper. You have to stay in it. You can't jettison it. And most of us, truth be known, most of us have a wake of, past relationships behind us, bobbing up and down in the wake of our lives. And it's a tragedy. Family is different. And so when you ask that specifically about family, I think you have to fight through that more.
But what about that voice in our head though? It's like, well, they're not listening to me. Why should I listen to them? Because that's usually why we struggle listening to people. I think is because, well, they're not going to listen to me. Why should I listen to them? That's not fair.
Yeah, I think you just basically have to make your mind up. You're either, you're mistreating me doesn't justify me mistreating you.
Wow.
And you're disrespecting me doesn't give me permission. And again, in the world, you would say that's fair. You treat me like that, I'm going to treat you like that back. If you're going to walk with Jesus, you're going to have to live on a different plane. You're going to have to value things that the world doesn't value. This is a huge subject because a lot of times we want to take the world's values and implement them into our Christian life, and then we get frustrated it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work because the world doesn't play by those rules. And so, when somebody mistreats you, if all you want is a relationship that's cantankerous and, combative, then treat them back the way they treated you. Obviously, a gentle answer turns away wrath. A harsh word, stirs up anger. Proverbs talks about that. And you just go, well, what do you want back? I think it's a basic courtesy when you're willing to treat somebody kindly and listen to what they have to say. So you either do that or you don't, And if I'm only going to treat those who treat me well, I'm only going to treat well those who treat me well, I just shrunk the pool considerably. And that changes the subject of what we're actually talking about.
Yeah. And when you do treat somebody harshly, I think that's more of an apathetic approach versus if you do treat them with kindness and the dignity that they deserve, it's treating them with empathy. And I think that's the big struggle is how do we deal empathetically rather than apathetically? So how do you suggest that we listen with this empathy and compassion that we each deserve?
Yeah. Well, I would say this, we're talking about empathy. Empathy is not, it is, but it's more than just me putting myself in your shoes or your place. I think empathy is trying to listen in such a way that I'm hearing your story and I'm experiencing your emotions, not what I would go through if I were put in that story. Because I think, again, where we started this podcast, it's just so easy. I'm just going to hear everything through my own lens. If you're telling me about something that was difficult for you, or something that was very challenging for you, something that was, overwhelmed you, or something that, put you in outrageous elation of joy, and all I'm doing is just using my filter for all of that, number one, I'm not really listening. And number two, I'll never feel what you felt. So somehow I think the difference between, just hearing and empathetic listening is that you are putting yourself in their place, but you're letting them tell you the emotions they felt, and then you're trying to feel those emotions, not your emotions as you would have felt. And again, it's a nuance, but I think it's really significant. And often, with the farther you're apart from a person, the greater the distance the greater the chasm you're trying to close, the harder it is for you to actually, feel that what they're feeling, because you go, I wouldn't feel that. And then to say the thing you should never say, which you shouldn't feel that. Well, they feel what they feel. And in fact, I think when in a message we were talking about this, and I said, a person's story is the truest truth they know. That is their truest truth. And the minute I start trying to tell you, when you're telling me about your past, you're telling me about some traumatic something, you're telling me about some disappointment, whatever, and I start telling you, well, you shouldn't feel that way, I have left this thing's going to go nowhere, because you're not going to receive that. Who are you to tell me what I should or shouldn't feel? I've got to, if I'm going to be an empathetic listener, try to feel what you're telling me you felt. And even if I don't have a box to put it in, or a prism to look at it through, I've got to try my hardest to see, well, why did that do that to you? What was it that caused you to feel that way? That is the hard work of listening. And again, most of us don't do that. Let's be straight up here, because it's hard work. But in the context of, you really want to understand somebody's story, you have to go there. You simply have to go there and not tell them you shouldn't have felt that.
And you're not going to get there the first time either that you try. I think it's definitely something that takes practice. It's probably going to be painful too, like to try to practice that. It's not easy.
Well, and most people won't invite you into that sacred space in the first pass anyway. Because again, the typical person's not going to go into, let me tell you the real hurtful things I've experienced in my life. We all probably know somebody who's just dying to tell you the real, But most people, for you to go into that, because again, I keep referring to it as sacred space. My real hurts in my life are sacred space. And just recently in a message, I talked about growing up without a dad. I'm not dropping that information quickly. There's got to be a reason, there's got to be a setup, there's got to be a sense that you're actually listening, a further sense that you could care about that. Why would I tell you that if I just think you're just going to blow that off or dismiss it? It takes some time.
Right.
Yeah. And it sounds like the difference between apathy and empathy is just saying, oh, I hear what you're saying, stop feeling like that. Whereas empathy is saying, whoa, I'm going to pause here and really recognize where you're at, and I'm going to jump into that problem with you and feel what you're feeling.
And apathy in its purest sense is I don't really care.
Yeah.
In its purest sense, you can tell me whatever you want to tell me. And again, if I'm not listening, I'm telling you I don't care. Mm-hmm. And if I'm dismissing what you're telling me, I'm telling you I don't care. And if I'm telling you shouldn't feel that, I'm telling you I don't care. Empathy is seriously trying to figure out, what did you feel? Why did you feel it? What did it do to you? And then entering into that, where you as a person who was telling me the story goes, that guy gets it. That guy gets it. That you understand. And how often are we truly understood when you're in a conversation? You feel like they just took the time to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. I've met a few people where you talk to them and it's like, they're just so zoned in on kind of what you're saying. And you can tell they're really listening to you. And you shared this funny story a few weeks ago where you were talking about your wife and how you were talking about something just going on in the house. And she said, oh yeah, don't you remember I told you that? And you're like, wait, what? Like, when did you never told me that? But she named the exact moment you were doing it. You were getting food out of the fridge. And
no, she named the exact moment.
She named, yeah, not you, but she got you. And you're like, okay, yeah, you probably did tell me that then. And so I think when I get into situations where I'm required to listen to someone. I can be either an active listener or I can just kind of passively listen and really not catch everything that they're saying. How would you, because empathy is one thing, but how would you suggest that we just give our whole attention to active listening on something?
Well, I think, again, start here. If you're telling me something and I'm looking over here and you keep talking, okay, bad on you. Because I'm looking over, I'm looking at the camera and you're talking to me and, hey, is that a Nikon? No, what is that? I'm not here. You should figure out I'm not here. Why is that so fascinating to him? You know what I'm saying? So the first thing has to be, am I present in the moment? Can you see that I'm present in the moment? I think so often the miscommunication or the lack of communication or the selective hearing, whatever we want to dub that, it comes from the fact that you never got my attention before you started talking. So I think that becomes a crucial thing. And honestly, in my life, and if I can be real vulnerable here, I don't hear well to start with. I don't have great hearing. So if my wife or anyone else is talking to me and we're not looking at each other, I'm not making eye contact, the odds of me understanding I might have heard what you said. I might have heard part of what you said. I might have heard you talking, but that you were talking to me and you wanted me to comprehend this, it's just, that's way down. So it's got to be, make eye contact and then let's lock and load here on what we're going to talk about. And again, we're talking about like in marriages, how many arguments are truly lost because it's two deaf people.
Yeah.
It's two deaf people conversing and like no one's hearing anything.
I was recently watching a really old interview of Mr. Rogers and Charlie Rose, and I thought it was so fascinating because Charlie Rose is the interviewer, right? That halfway through the interview, Mr. Rogers flipped it around and all of a sudden was asking Charlie Rose questions, and Charlie Rose was like having to think these deep answers and bring them out. If I think of one person that I know of in my past, my childhood, that was like the best listener, somebody to like, if I want to listen like he did, it was Mr. Rogers. Like everything I've seen, the documentaries that have come out is just like, he knew how to listen.
Well, and you just said to me the absolute key to knowing that somebody's listening to you and that the time that you're investing in that conversation is worth investing. Mm-hmm. You just said he asked Charlie Rose these questions. The ability to ask questions, and honestly, I think I have married Lisa, my wife, is the best questioner I've ever met. And if you don't know how to ask questions, you're not going to be interesting at all, and nor are you going to be interested. So to be interested and interesting, it's the art of taking what you just said, processing it, and then, what that makes me think? It makes me think this. Well, did you ever think that? Do you ever, so it's the idea of I'm really processing what you're saying, but it makes me then wonder this question and then probing deeper. And when you say, man, I just don't understand that. Tell me more. Tell me more. That's inviting. That's because so often we're like, am I boring you yet? Am I like, you had enough yet? But when you say, tell me more, and you're actually going, okay, I'm lost right here because you said, and then it took me, but now are you saying, I know you're trying to go on this journey with me and we're going to have a great conversation. Too many times in too many conversations, you get done with a conversation and one of those two parties knows a lot about the other and the other one knows nothing about the other one because one person was engaged in asking questions and going there. The other person just thought, oh, this is awesome. It's all about me. If you want to hear, it cannot be about you. How can you hear and it be about you? Mm-hmm. It's going to be about you if you talk. If you want to understand, if I want to know you, John, I have to let you talk. And I stop and you talk and then I go, I don't get it. Or, wow, what did that do? Did you ever have? And then all of a sudden, I'm engaged.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about, like the phrase "tell me more." Are there any other like questions that are really just good that people can use as a matrix of like, this is a good question to practice asking in a conversation?
One of our key staff people here, our business guy always has the expression, help me to understand. Help me to understand. Okay, well, that's pretty disarming. All right. Okay, here's what you're not getting. Here it is. Help me to understand. Well, tell me more. Just anything of little things you say that just indicate I really do want. I want to be here. I want to be listening. I want to be in this. And there's all the again. Are we almost done here? All the cues that we give. Tapping.
Yeah.
Just like yawning, rolling your eyes, or like looking past a person. You're done listening. You're done listening. When we're locking eyes and you're talking and I'm here and then I'm asking, I'm not interested in what's going on over there. I'm not looking. I have no idea what time it is. It doesn't matter. You are the most important person in the room, and I'm conveying that by the fact that I'm listening to you. The best communicators are the ones who I think just that is who they are. They just know how to do that. And when you're done, and that's that thing when. You've heard this adage. It's been used in lots of different settings. I don't remember anything that person said, but I remember what that person made me feel. They made me feel like I was the most important person on the planet because of the way they engaged. And it had to do with listening. It was not about talking.
You're talking about, the verbal cues of somebody can just totally zone out and just check out and say, hey, I'm done listening with you, or listen to you, talking to you. And I think it's really easy to do that when you're in a conversation where you just know off the bat you don't agree with this person. Coming out of a crazy political season, probably many conversations where sometimes you get approached and you're just like, hey, I don't necessarily want to have this conversation, so let's just avoid it. How can we just approach that type of situation, not just politics, but just any conversation where we might not necessarily agree with somebody, but we want to be open and we want to be active in listening. How do we go about having that conversation with someone that we don't necessarily agree with?
Well, I think it's got to start with do you really even want to be in a conversation with that person? And Saturday Night Live does that spoof about the girl at the party you wish you'd never asked a question of, or something like that. We all get in conversations where you're just not interested. So I would say this: I wouldn't fake it. If I'm in some gathering and I know that this person's going to go off on something that I have absolutely zero tolerance for hearing, I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to listen. I'm not going to pretend like I care. I'm not going to go through any of those motions. And so I either have to care or I don't care. And that's an acid test. That's in your own spirit and soul and heart. If you're not the least bit interested, don't try to pretend like you are, because everything's going to give you away.
How do you get out of a conversation like that without sounding like no, dude, you're an idiot. Like, I'm out of here.
I'm not really sure what to tell you on that, John. Just do it graciously, do it kindly, do it quickly. Because again, the longer it goes, the more awkward it gets. I only have a limited amount of time, period. I only have a limited amount of words to use. I've only got, conversation's a resource. And I'm just not going to invest a lot of my time and resource in somebody who, no matter what you say, there's nothing I could say that would change what you're saying. And through the depth of who I am, I've heard what you said. I know what you're about. I fundamentally don't agree. Now, if you're going, okay, I know you don't agree, but can I just ask you to show me what it is you don't agree with? Can you just help me to understand, why is this so hard for you? Now you've asked me something I can answer. Now I'm interested because it's not just what you're telling me that I've already got, but now you're going, give me some information, and then I would be engaged more. But all of us and everyone who's watching this, you just get into too many conversations where you truly are not interested because the person has played the cards on the table. You've looked at me and go, I'm not going to go there. And it can be any number. It could be some conspiracy theory they're boiling on, and you're just like going, yeah, that's the nuttiest thing I think I've ever heard. And there are people who would just go, that's the stupidest thing. That's the nuttiest thing. That's the dumbest thing. It's the most moronic, whatever the subject is.
Yeah.
And if that's you and that's your spirit, don't waste their time.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Like, it's almost more caring to be like, I just can't engage in this because it's going to waste your time, and there's no way we're going to get any value out of this.
Well, but I would say this, and this is the caution to all of us: be careful before you close your mind, because that's the trouble with somebody's story who's different than your story, somebody's point who's different than your point. If you believe that I know everything you're going to say. I've heard it all, blah, blah, blah. And that might be true. It's probably not true. It's probably you've already made your mind up and you've closed you've closed the gate and nothing else is going to come through that. I would say be slow to do that.
Okay.
Be slow to get into arguments and be slow to close your mind that person has nothing to say.
Yeah, I like what you're saying here about being slow to just closing your mind and shutting the topic off immediately. And it reminds me of earlier this summer, we went through this series, The Love Beyond, and you talked about loving beyond our story. And you had this illustration where you talked about a car crash, right? And if you're driving alongside the road and you pull up to this car crash, you don't immediately get out of your car and start pointing fingers and say, did you do this? Who did that? You would get out and you would help, or you would pray, or you'd call 911 or do something. And I thought it was a beautiful example of what we should be doing, of going beyond and loving people and caring about people before jumping to our own conclusions. And so I was just wondering if you could just expand on that idea, because I think it is a great illustration, like I said, for just how to listen to people and to really be there. But I'd love to just have you expand on that some more.
And you just said it, we jump to conclusions. So again, you start to tell me something about your story, and all of a sudden I go, well, I can tell you exactly what happened. The minute I reach that point, I'm done, you're done, it's over. All of this that we've been talking about came to an end when I jumped to the conclusion, or I reached, the line, well, this is what you should have done. Which, nobody likes being in a conversation with somebody going, well, you know what you should have done. And then I was saying like, oh yeah, well, I feel like a total idiot because that's not what I did and it's not what even came to me. And I never would do that. That was an illustration, as you said, of, so if there was an accident on the road and you drove right up to it, the immediate thing you would not be doing is trying to figure out who's at fault and, who's to blame and you shouldn't have done this. The immediate thing you do is just dive in and try to help. The facts of what happened will come out later. All the details will come out later. And especially as Christians, if we're going to say we're going to see some horrible thing happen, and until we know exactly what caused it, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to help. We're not going to come to the aid of somebody. That was the point I was making. That's craziness. Get in, help, do what you can do. And then you find out, well, this guy was drunk, and the accident was because this guy and this poor guy. And, then you can go, oh, okay, all right, now I understand more. And especially, and again, and that was in a context of, so many racial things that are happening in our country. We're so quick. And this is where I think we get manipulated by media. There are always agendas of people trying to get you to feel, I want this visceral gut reaction out of people, so I'm going to slant the news this way or whatever. We're very, very vulnerable to being marketed. Ahmaud Arbery gets killed, and all of a sudden you go, well, he should have never been in that neighborhood. Or, he walked to that house, and that house was being built, and he looked like he was robbing the house. It's like, a poor guy got shot. Start there and believe the best about it before you just immediately start taking sides. But taking sides is drawing a conclusion. Jump into a conclusion. Well, he shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have been in that part of town. I don't know him. I don't know anything about that part of town. I don't know any of that. I just know it's really tragic, when things like that happen. And if you want to understand, especially as we're talking about racial issues, if you want to understand somebody of a different race, by the very virtue of the phrase a different race, you cannot project onto them your life experiences if you're not of that race. The only chance you've got of understanding what they've gone through is to have them go explain it to me. Don't jump to conclusions that you'd be all different if you had gone through that.
Yeah, no, and that sounds a lot like what we talked about at the top of the podcast, even of saying, hey, I see my life through this perspective or this lens. And, like you said, we can't just jump to the conclusions.
My life is the only life I've lived.
Yeah.
My lens is the only lens I've got. It's my natural default. Of course, I'm going to immediately go there. But the point of listening to try to understand somebody else's story is go, you're not me. You didn't live my life, and I'm not you, and I didn't live your life. So you tell me about your story, and then I'll try my hardest through the lenses I've got that I can't change to begin to get my brain around what you went through. And only when I've done that with full integrity and sincerity can I ever begin to think I might have done it differently.
Well, that is good. Guys, I think that is a good place to just kind of wrap things up. Leave people thinking about just everything that's been talked about.
Yeah, I feel like this might be a great podcast to listen to a couple times. I'm just going to say that out loud, because there is so much there to be thinking about, especially learning to listen. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Beyond the Lines podcast. We record here at Central Christian Church in Phoenix, Arizona. Our church is pursuing the mantra of love beyond, which calls us to empathize with people who are different and build bridges of peace. If you're interested at all learning about our church, check us out at centralaz.com. That's centralaz.com. We have online services as well as a bunch of different locations in the Phoenix metro area if you're local. We will see you at next month's episode of Beyond the Lines. Until then, start loving beyond your lines.
Listen up.